犬ですね。
私は光で裁きが我らの力を受けてみよ神の裁きが受け入れよ貴様はもう終わりだフィールドと
How's it going, guys? Origami here. Welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to be doing another Duel Masters Play video, a deck profile on another top deck and a very common deck as well. We will see throughout, you know, the different metas, different months, because this is a very sort of lasting deck in terms of the kind of deck that it is, and this is the 5C ramp deck. Mainly this version focuses on the violence fusion, which summons as many gods as you want, as well as the mana bonanza that allows it to get to that 13 mana mark. So it's a very common deck. I would say in the current meta it's more tier 1.5, closer to tier 2 than it is tier 1. But you know, if you've played Duel Masters for a long time, 5C, 4C ramp has always been a thing throughout the metas, throughout all the new booster editions, and so I think this might be one that you might want to look into investing in, as well as learning how to play it. So let's just jump right into it. So 5C ramp, obviously we start with the ramp, and the most common ramp card is Faerie Life, 2 mana, shield trigger, you know, does what it does, add 1 mana. The second card, Dellinder, Machine Admiral, 2 mana, 3k, blocker, can't attack players, but it does have that very nice overdrive effect with the other 3 mana colors. When you put this creature in a battle zone, if your opponent has more cards in their hand than you have in yours, you may draw until you have the same number of cards as them, then draw a card. So essentially you match your opponent's hand size plus 1. So that's a very good card, 5 mana for potentially a lot of draw, could be 3, could be 4, and also as a blocker to sort of negate a bit of rush if you need it early, 2 mana. It's a fair price to play. Next up, a card that's been very rampant around all decks, in fact, because of a very oppressive deck, which is the Nature Dark Romanov deck. We're seeing this is Purification Trap. This is a mana ramp. Put the top card of your deck into the mana zone, and the additional effect is your opponent shuffles all cards in their graveyard into their deck. So it's a very disruptive card for Romanov, also for those kind of grave evolutions and other stuff. So we play 2, some decks play 3, it's up to you, because objectively it's not a very efficient mana ramp as itself, but you need it for the disruption. 1 or 2 would be good. The third card, Faerie Miracle, is pretty much what makes 5C tick. Put the top card of your deck into your mana zone. If you have all civilizations in your mana zone, put another card from the top of your deck into the mana zone. So this is 3 mana, potentially ramps you 2 if you have all 5C in your mana zone. That is very, very efficient and gets you to that mana bonanza or the violence fusion as quickly as possible. The next card, we have Jack Alcadeias, very common card, especially in terms of shield triggers. 4 mana, 1k, shield trigger, blocker, can attack. That is important to note, and the effect is that when this creature enters the battle zone, destroy one of your opponent's creature that has power 2000 or less. So very anti-rush, you bomb 1, 2k or less, and you have a 1k blocker. So that's very useful. 2 saves, very useful saves for charging if you need it. And yeah, another very common card, so nothing special to talk about here. The next card, slightly different, a new addition to this deck itself, and that is Gila, Silver Rift Guardian. So 5 mana, 4k, it's a blocker. Your opponent's evolution creatures enter the battle zone tapped and it can't attack players. So this is very anti-rush. It is light, and also it targets specifically evolution creatures because that's very prominent in the current meta. I think all of the top tier decks except this deck itself plays with evolution creatures, so this sort of mitigates a lot of, you know, 1-turn rush decks. It mitigates the grave evolution and nature evolutions from the rush decks. It sort of negates some of the Romanov grave evolutions, as well as the last, I think that water evolution deck, to prevent sort of a 1-turn kill. So very useful. I would say this card is very tech and very specific to the current meta. I think in the next update you'll probably see this replaced by something else because it sort of doesn't really push the objective of this own deck. Sort of a very obvious answer to some of the things we're seeing in the meta right now, which may not be the case when the new set pops. The next card, another very common card, Flower Basket of Charm and Tricks, Water Nature, 6 mana, shield trigger, put one of your opponent's creatures into the mana zone, which is like a natural snare, but also draw a card and put a card from your hand into your deck and shuffle it. So it's sort of an enhanced natural snare, but you get that kind of color combination you want to be putting in your mana zone to get that 5C in order to get your Faerie Miracle popping off. So that's a very common one for 4C, 5C decks. Very good shield trigger as well. The next one, really anti-rush, Hellscraper. Hellscraper really helps in terms of the rush decks. Shield trigger, destroy any number of your opponent's creatures that have a total power of 5k or less. So you can add a combination of creatures, 2 creatures, 3 creatures that total up to 5k and destroy all of them. So very good against rush decks, the Dark Nature rush especially, but also fire and mana is something that you kind of need to get your 5C because it's not very common here aside from the gods. The next card is one of the important cards, 8 mana, spell, Mana Bonanza, and the effect is put the same number of cards in your mana zone from the top of your deck into your mana zone. So this doubles whatever amount of mana you have. It doesn't come into the mana zone untapped, so it doesn't increase your available mana. I think that's the phrasing. But you know, when you hit 8 mana and you do this, immediately next turn you have 13, which is pretty much no other card can accomplish that. And you're so willing to haphazardly throw cards into your mana zone because that's where actually you want your gods to be when you play Violence Fusion. And it is supposed to be a OTK deck in terms of you want to play Violence Fusion as sort of the last turn finisher, and everything before that is either ramp or defending yourself from being rushed. So quite crucial, but we only play 2 because there's literally, you can only play this card once. The moment you play the card a second time, you lose the game. So that's something you be careful of. When you see it, don't charge it, keep it in your hand. You really need it. Obviously, it is possible to reach 13 mana without Mana Bonanza, especially with the number of Faerie Miracles we have and the other ramp. But in terms of the most efficient, if you want to get a beeline to the objective of this deck, Mana Bonanza is one of the important cards to do that. Next, we turn to Violence Fusion, and arguably one of the more important cards of the deck, or maybe the better way to phrase it is how this deck is centered around, playing this card, which is 13 mana, really difficult, but you know, we've talked about all the ramp cards we have prior to this. And the effect is put random gods that have different names from your mana zone and graveyard into the battle zone in their linked up form up to the maximum number of the battle zone. So essentially, we'll play one of every different god you have in your mana zone in the final linked up form. In this deck we play 3, but 3 of the strongest gods. So you could play more gods essentially, but this is obviously a very powerful card when you have 3 fully linked up gods. More or less a game ender, yet ironically much weaker than a lot of the other game enders we have. Yep, so we move on to the final 3 cards, which is the 3 strongest gods in the game. In my opinion, I believe probably undisputed. That's why it's even in this deck. First one, Geki Metsu, limited to 1 because of how ridiculously strong it is. You know, when it attacks, you can burn 2 of your opponent's mana. When it's blocked, your opponent discards their hand. When it attacks and isn't blocked, destroy one of your opponent's creatures that has 6k power or less. Quad breaker. Just very strong regardless of what your opponent chooses to do. Next up, we play 3 of the heavy death metal. So actually, when you play this deck outside of the context of Violence Fusion, the effects on summon of each of it is really what makes it really strong. But even in its final form, without all the enter the battle zone effects, it's really strong because you're cheating out 22 mana worth of a card in 13 mana when you use Violence Fusion. Obviously, the effects, your opponent's mana is reduced by 1, your opponent can't choose this creature, which is ridiculous. Your opponent's creature must attack this creature if able, and it is a world breaker. So really strong finisher, breaks all your opponent's shields, your opponent can't choose it, and this creature and one more is essentially all you need to end the game, obviously barring shield triggers. But defensively, it works as well because all your opponent's creature must attack it, and it has 24k attack, so very few things are going over it without some sort of weird buff. And the last one, Zenaku Blocker Triple Breaker. When this creature attacks, destroy one of your opponent's creatures without any qualifier. When it attacks, whether it's blocked or not blocked, destroy one of your opponent's creatures, no power restriction, no color restriction at all. When one of your gods will be destroyed, return it to your hand instead. So this applies to all 3 gods. When they are destroyed while this Zenaku is still on the field, it goes back to your hand. Each turn, untap this after it blocks for the first time, so it gets in 2 blocks. And at the end of the turn, untap this so you can attack with it, trigger its on attack effect, destroy one of your opponent's creatures, and it's still untapped, ready to block on your opponent's turn. So really strong card, and we play 3 of it as well. Of course, when we look at this deck, honestly a very expensive deck if you think about it. 3 Violence Fusion, that's SR, Geki Metsu. All the gods are SR. The number of SR you will need if you don't have them already is really high. But because these are so strong cards, I would say that it is worth crafting it if you do have the resources to craft them, and probably they will last a long time. Of course, I think Geki Metsu might be rotating out of the meta soon, but you know, Zenaku was reprinted. Maybe Heavy Death Metal might be rotating out, but not that soon anyway. So it's really expensive, but it's sort of worth crafting if you understand what I mean. By the way, you can ignore the Hyperspatial Zone. I just put cards there to confuse my opponent. So, you know, I think on occasions you'll find this deck in tier 1, but you can even see by the composition of the cards, the fact that you're playing Purification Trap, you know, the Guardian blocker that makes your opponent's evolution tap. It's very, very defensive in the current meta, and that is because the current meta decks are so strong. And that's why this deck is probably closer to a tier 2, tier 1.5 than it is a tier 1, but nonetheless, a very common, very popular, and sort of deck that I believe has more longevity than the other decks in general. So yeah, that's sort of the baseline of the deck. Obviously, this is the bare bones version. If you want to add your own flavor, your own flair, you want more gods, because obviously we're playing Violence Fusion for 3 gods, but you can actually play it for up to like 5-6 gods if you want to include more gods. But honestly, to me that's clunky, but to you, you know, do what you like. It does work with more gods. And a lot of the defensive tech cards, if you want to swap them out for other stuff, feel free to do so. There's nothing stopping you. I'm going to show you the variation that I had before the last one, which I didn't have that light creature, but I'm playing, I think, King Alcadeias, which, you know, I thought it was good, but ultimately when you're trying to push for that 1-turn rush, it's not really doing much. King Alcadeias is more suitable in those kind of decks where you end up playing like Spell Delphine as well, so it's a very control oriented deck. And there are variations, let me check. This is a variation for one without Violence Fusion, so you can see a lot more control. This time round, obviously you can charge some of your gods, but ideally you shouldn't, and you should start summoning them out early if you can, if you reach that amount of mana from ramp, in order to, because you're going to play out, you know, the gods individually. You're not going to get it to cheat them out. So this is a variation you might want to look at as well. But overall, you know, this archetype, this 5C, 4C ramp will always be around in Duel Masters. I feel I haven't seen a meta where they haven't been relevant. At worst, tier 2 I would say. But yeah, so here is a very common 5C ramp version for this specific current meta. Obviously tweak the things you need as the meta changes, but I believe the structure and the bones of the deck will always be there. And of course, after this we will have the gameplay, so stay tuned for that. But before that, if you'd like to see more Duel Masters Play content on this channel, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, like, comment down below. And if you want to see more in general and keep up to date with the video I'm doing, make sure to subscribe. Don't need to hit that notification bell because I do a lot of videos. You just, you know, subscribe would help me go a long way. Thank you so much, and I'll be back with the gameplay. Stay safe. Bye bye.
Keep it up one more minute. Keep it up, you're so great. Standing and talking, you got me checkmate. No one's watching or nothing. I have cleared out the room. I swear that you can get to be a big edges of you. Ooh, ooh. Every little inch of my skin, baby, I will let you in.
敵を重みに受けて
Call me up in the night. Call me up, set me straight. Pickpocket my eye socket. There's no time to be proved. I let you kid me tongue. I let you in and dance. Take us higher. Cuddle me blue. Take me to the edges of you. Baby, I will feel the 779. Tell me you do. Baby,
受け入れよ王たる我に力を私は控えている裁きが
take me to the edges.
我らの力を受けてみよ神の裁きが
Inch of my skin, baby, I will let you in.
受け入れよ
Cuddle me,
貴様はもう終わりだシールドトリガー発動だ
every little inch of my skin, baby, I will let you in.
今日ここで終わるのだ
We're on a journey, looking back on the things that we've taken for granted, but feels like we're learning to be better. What's been holding us back now? Let's move closer to a new history. Find out what we can be together. Take my hand and we will conquer the world. This is
私は開いて立つれ
'Cause one day we'll be looking back at this. We were in a big mess
神秘の力見せましょう
together. We found a way to go. We found the strength to go on together. To go on together. To go on together.
祈りを捧げよ 行きます神のご加護
Moonlight and fire, dancing closer together and staying forever young. What about you and I then? Can we two find a way to align with each other? Let's
祈りを捧げよ
move history. Now all we can be. Take my hand and we will conquer the world. This
行きます
'Cause one day we'll be looking back at this. We were in a big mess.
届き物め
But we found
神のご加護
right from wrong. Found a
神のご加護
together.
もう終わりだ。
トリガー発動。
貴様はもう終わりだ。
こんなはずじゃ。
貴様はもう終わりだ。貴様はもう終わりだ。貴様はもう終わりだ。心を忘れるな。貴様はもう終わりだ。心を忘れるな。
We go to New Jersey. Your eyes say I'll be worried.
悪が見せてこそ世界は誰に歯向かう。
究極の力でさらなる高みへ。善悪を
受け入れよ。
ミゲル・クミミちゃん大勝利。
Of us. How did we end up here? We used to laugh so hard. When did we stop loving, babe? When did it all go too far? We don't listen when we talk. We fight fire with fire. It's like we don't know how to talk without the flames getting higher. You hear what I mean? Yeah, nothing else in between. Yeah, try to connect without making a scene, but we don't listen. We don't listen when we talk. I know you have the reasons to yell at me tonight, baby. Consider this as a lesson that maybe we should open up the sorrow of us.
僕に任せなよ。
How did we end up here?
トリガー発動。
So hard. When did we stop loving, babe? When did it all go too far? We don't listen when we talk. We fight fire. It's like we don't know how to talk without the flames getting higher. You hear what I mean? It's like we don't know how to talk without the flames getting higher. You hear what I mean? Yeah, nothing else in between. Try to connect with the machine, but we don't listen when we talk. We don't listen when we talk.
I'll be feeling rich, but 걱정 따윈 없지. 나를 위해 내밀어 I don't really care, just move out of my way. Reaching for the stars, always always on the right road 사실 어떤 길이라도 그게 상관없지 Finna make it work 늦더라도 고래 삶은 마치 롤에 당신까지 롤에 Put on down give them all give them 100 I got a lot on my mind 아직은 나 힘이 들어가 I'm riding yeah 나는 나이 싫지 않아 목소리 내야 해 목소리 내야 돼 Got a different view 여유롭게 차려 내일은 더 빛나지 당연히 내 삶은 shine like a diamond 괜히 해서 뭐해 걱정 I got no worries no I got no worries no I'm shining like a diamond shining like a diamond yeah I got no worries 걱정 따윈 없지 no 되기 원해 하루만 더 태양이 너무 가까워 나의 그들은 burning 나는 운한 방을 젖혀 담비가 내릴 때까지 wow 규제 누가 나를 나보다 더 믿어 네가 날 버려도 아직 내가 있어 yeah 너는 내가 무너지기 빌어 가끔 내가 위태해 보여도 never fall
正義のためにさらなる力をじゃない
밟아 브룸 브룸 에스컬레이트 편법 원칙 따윈 꽤나 줘 오늘도 생고 난 내 방식대로 go 모두가 shine bright 한지 모르고 있어 그저 이 밤이 낮이 될 때까지 keep on and on and on all night till you hear my echoes whoa 여유롭게 달려 내일은 더 빛나지 당연히 괜히 해서 뭐해 걱정 I got no worries no I got no worries
どうしてやろうかな
I got no worries Shining like a diamond shining like a diamond yeah
Just please give me a call
受け入れよここにある貴様はもう終わりだ撃滅ちゃん撃滅ちゃん
このボクシャーが倒されるなんて
トリガー発動
神の裁きだ
不滅